B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Thursday, February 1st, 2018. And yes, I do pronounce both R's in February. I was drawn this way. And to open the podcast today, I want to take you way back to the early days of American television, to the ancient program called I've Got a Secret. And in the show file for today's podcast, I've linked to the episode where Ronald Reagan, who was not yet a politician, he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, and in that role, he joined the McCarthy team and turned in and blacklisted actors during the Red Scare. He also was the host of the General Electric Theater, and he was welcomed to the game show I've Got a Secret by host Gary Moore, who was chain-smoking Winston cigarettes. As you'll see if you watch the video in black and white, Winston was the major sponsor, and their name was on the desk, on the screen, the entire time of the show. And the premise is that the guest comes on, and the panelists try to guess the secret that the guest has shared with the host. And we're not going to get into the meat of the game show here, but I will just play the intro for you to tease you a little bit. And if you have time, follow the link to YouTube. It's kind of a hoot. And I imagine many of my younger listeners have never heard of the game show I've Got a Secret.
Now, my friends, it is a great joy to welcome a gentleman for whom I have the greatest respect professionally, personally. Here's the host of the General Electric Theater on CBS every Sunday night, Mr. Ronald Reagan. Tell us what your secret is about tonight.
Well, Gary, it just occurred to me that all of the men on this show tonight have one thing in common. We used to be radio announcers.
That's true. Henry and Steve started as announcers, but you were an announcer?
That's right.
And I was an announcer. That's right.
Yeah, it's a comforting thought, isn't it, to know that if everything goes wrong, we got something to fall back on. We can always go back.
The Steve he refers to is Steve Allen.
True for you and me, of course, because we are still known for our diction, our pronunciation, and our magnificent voice quality.
So Reagan goes on to give an announcer test to the panelists, and somewhere in there is his secret. And my point in trying to distract you with the old game show I've Got a Secret is that's what it seems like to me in Washington today, as we have all of these people who are invested into the dark programs of the United States. They hold security clearances. They're allowed to look at the secret and the super secret and the top secret and all of that stuff. And they're playing games with one another right now to see who can leak secrets and get away with it. And in the case of Republican House Intelligence Chair Devin Nunes, who is unrecused now from the Russian investigation, he is trying to publicly release what critics say are deep secrets of the United States of America. And this duel is leading to a confrontation. The Trump White House has approved, after some redactions, the release of the Nunes memo. It's 3.5 pages, maybe less now with the redactions. And so we expect that within the next 24 or 48 hours, it will be unveiled. And Nunes is drawing criticism from the FBI and the Department of Justice, currently controlled by his own party, the Republicans, with nominees who were put in place by the president. And you've got Nunes and Trump squared off against the Justice Department in the case here, Rod Rosenstein, the number 2 at Justice, and the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray. And they're saying, don't release this. This is top secret stuff. It's going to do permanent damage to sources and methods. And I say bullshit on all of this. Most of what is declared secret in our government today is done so to prevent embarrassment, not to protect covert operators or secret methods. After all, Ed Snowden revealed quite a bit. And there are other covert operations that have become public over time. And most secrets don't remain secret forever. The Kennedy assassination, hey, that one has worked. The 9/11 cover-up, it's holding pretty well. But for the most part, secrets eventually are revealed. So this has led to the FBI declaring grave concerns about key factual omissions and accuracy. This can also be seen as an attempt to inoculate the public. Some really bad shit's about to go public, and the FBI is doing its best to damp it down, to water it down, and to declare that this shouldn't happen, that this is wrong and bad. And they've enlisted John Thune, the Republican from South Dakota, who is on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's saying we need to see this before it can be made public. And he warned that if they're going to release the GOP memo, they should also release the other memo that was crafted by Adam Schiff and the Democrats. We don't have a clue, really, what's in there. So this leakathon continues, and we eventually will probably see this memo released. And late yesterday, Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on House Intelligence, he threw a new curveball, or was it popcorn from the peanut gallery? Maybe rotten eggs? And he said that Nunes has made material changes to the document, at least 5 material changes to different parts of the memo, including a modification that appears intended to water down the overall importance of the majority's purported findings. And Nunes responds that this is a bizarre effort. He said he made minor edits to the document, characterized them as grammatical fixes, 2 edits requested by the FBI and by the Democrats on the committee. Nunes said that Schiff's letter was part of an increasingly strange attempt to thwart publication. Now, neither one can claim the high ground here. They have been leaking vociferously for months. And, of course, if you are a high-ranking official with a security clearance in Washington, you can generally leak with impunity because the reporters won't give up your identity in exchange for expected access in the future. We're also getting further reports, again based on leaks. CNN reported Wednesday that in a December meeting in which Trump asked Rod Rosenstein if he was on my team, Trump's team, Rosenstein is reported to have responded, "Of course, we're all on your team, Mr. President." But that does show a pattern of Trump trying to identify who his enemies are inside his own administration. And he's a paranoid mofo. You know that. And here's a hoot of a comment from a man who has zero credibility. Eric Holder, the former Attorney General of Obama, issued a warning about the Nunes memo. People must understand what is at stake by release of the bogus, contrived Nunes memo. It uses normally protected material and puts at risk our intel capabilities in order to derail a legitimate criminal investigation. This is unheard of. It's dangerous and irresponsible. So the rhetoric is really amped up. And I believe that both sides fear that the bubbles they've created with their parallel investigations and parallel conspiracy theories are going to burst. And they're going to be left with some liquid on their faces that they find extremely uncomfortable. And if I had to bet, the people who are going to be embarrassed if this breaks, and they may be able to keep it bottled up, I don't dismiss that possibility, but the people who I think are most likely to be harmed by this are the Democrats and the media who have been promoting the Trump-Russia telenovela these many months. Another leak yesterday, emails obtained by CNN show that the FBI agent at the center of the controversy, that's Peter Strzok, has a more complex relationship to the whole scandal than was previously believed. So we know that Strzok was part of the investigation into the Hillary Clinton email issues. He helped draft the first round of the letter that was used in October by James Comey to announce he was reopening the email investigation after Clinton emails were found on Anthony Weiner's laptop in his, his pedophile investigation. But CNN goes on to say Strzok did, however, harbor reservations about Comey making a public announcement just days before the election. He sent a text message to that effect. Conservative critics have seized on the text between Peter Strzok and his lover. The extramarital affair between Strzok and Lisa Page is no longer a secret. And this is so rich in irony. Strzok and Page thought, number one, that their extramarital affair wouldn't be exposed. They sent hundreds, if not thousands, of text messages to each other. And Page at one point said, gosh, are these going to be exposed? And Strzok said, don't worry about it. Now, that same concept comes up in a moment with the issues now surfacing related to this woman Hicks, the communications director in the Trump White House. So this clearly is very complicated. And we have this targeted, selective, weaponized leaking. Yeah, Hillary used that term, weaponized, about how WikiLeaks used her emails against her. But this is reaching a new level of madness. Another leak, this time to the New York Times, relates, and this leak presumably comes from the Mueller investigation, because what we're learning is that they've got a couple of people who were witnesses to the way that Trump himself fabricated a press release trying to explain away the Trump Tower meeting with the Russian gang that was orchestrated by Don Jr. and attended by Jared, the Crown Prince, and Paul Manafort, and others, as we know. And what they report is that the Mueller team is making a major focus on this press release. Now, the Times goes out of its way to point out that it's not a crime to mislead the American public with a fake news release. Lying to federal investigators is a crime. And some people who support Trump believe that Mueller has no grounds to ask Trump about the statement and that he should refuse to discuss it. So buried down here, we learn about a guy named Mark Corallo. He served as a spokesman for Trump's legal team before he resigned last July. And Corallo has received an interview request from the special counsel and has agreed to the interview. And here's where we learn about the leakers, according to 3 people with knowledge of the request. Now, 1 or 2 of those could be Corallo's side. He's not speaking publicly, but his lawyer is. But we're told there are 3 people with knowledge of the request. This suggests that Mueller is actively leaking back just to cloud the air and stink things up even further inside the Beltway. So Corallo is planning to tell Mueller about a previously undisclosed conference call with Trump and Hope Hicks, the White House communications director. And this is where it gets really interesting. I just told you how Peter Strzok, the FBI investigator, assured his lover that their text messages would never come out. Well, Hope Hicks is being quoted by Corallo when she was on Air Force One and they're putting this memo together, and then there was a conference call the following day, and Hope Hicks reportedly said that the emails written by Don Jr. and others related to the Trump Tower meeting will never get out. And Corallo is suggesting that she inferred that they were going to somehow destroy those emails or otherwise obstruct justice to prevent them from coming out. But how is her naivete, believing that the emails would not surface, much different from the false confidence that Peter Strzok had that his text messages with Lisa Page would never come out? And this really, to me, epitomizes the absurdity of the secret games that are played in Washington today. They don't even get a prize for keeping a secret here. It's just a cutthroat method of survival. Now, Corallo, in a self-serving disclosure, also says that when Trump began questioning him about the nature of documents related to that meeting at Trump Tower, Corallo cut off the conversation and urged the president to continue that discussion with his lawyers. So he's kind of setting himself up as the John Dean here, a principled guy who recognized wrongdoing and told the president there's a cancer on the presidency. Trevor Aronson, who knows quite a bit about the FBI's use of FISA court applications, he weighs in at The Intercept today, and I'm going to charitably presume that he didn't write the headline here, which I find offensive. It reads, "Release the memo hypocrisy to undermine Trump-Russia inquiry. Republicans want to release classified information." But what Aronson actually reports on in his article is the process at the FISA court and how when many of the cases that Aronson has covered related to these trumped-up, these fabricated cases, these frame-ups of alleged domestic terrorist suspects, when they go to court and demand to see the FISA application that was used to authorize surveillance of them, they are told, using a boilerplate statement, that the government will not agree to release this because it would harm U.S. national security by revealing the secret sources and methods used to conduct sensitive counterterrorism and counterintelligence investigations. Just last summer, Jeff Sessions signed a declaration like that in a New York terrorism case, arguing that the disclosure of the FISA information could reasonably be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security of the United States. And Aronson notes that federal judges have consistently sided with the Justice Department in these arguments, blocking defendants and their lawyers from accessing materials related to the FISA application. Now, is this a pretext that's being used to argue against disclosure of the Nunes memo, or is there real concern that a precedent will be set and the house of cards on which many of these almost 800 domestic terror prosecutions have been based on could collapse? Well, I wish that to happen. And again, I rail against secrecy in a broad manner. It's time to put an end to this madness. And I know it's not going to happen, but it's my job to tell you that. Every day I pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. And today I'm not going to ask you for a subscription or to send me money. First, I have received information that one of my biggest boosters in the Redwood Empire, the north coast of California and the town of Eureka, Billy Cook, has a big birthday coming up on Saturday. He's turning 40. Well, Billy, I was planning to surprise you and show up at your birthday event, but my helicopter is in for repairs, and I don't have time to drive up and back this weekend, so you're going to have to accept my best wishes here on the podcast. But what I'd like to ask you to do in honor of Billy's 40th birthday, and instead of listening to my plea for you to take out a paid subscription, I want to ask you to go to YouTube and put Peter B. Collins in the search window. And when you see the icon with my dog Chloe's picture pop up, click on that. Every day we post the podcast on YouTube, but not many people are accessing it there. So I'm asking you to go there so that you know it's there, and also click the subscribe button on the YouTube page. It's not the same as a subscription to the podcast as I describe it, because there's no money involved. All you're agreeing to do is support the podcast on YouTube, and I believe you will get YouTube notifications when I post a new episode. And what's in it for me? Well, I'm trying to meet the requirements of YouTube so that we can run ads that you can opt out of after 4 seconds, and they'll send me a little money. That's what I'm up to. So I'd appreciate it. Go to YouTube, search for Peter B. Collins Podcast, click on that page, and then become a subscriber. I will be very, very grateful. Well, this week, a federal court upheld the language of the Dodd-Frank law that established the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and provided extra protection for its director, that he couldn't be fired or removed by the president except for good cause. Now, the court has ruled that that language supersedes the law that was used by Trump to temporarily plug Mick Mulvaney in as the director of the CFPB. Now, this is important for the future, but it doesn't affect the current struggle over Mulvaney's interim appointment because the previous director voluntarily resigned. And that is overall disappointing. So what is Mulvaney up to? Well, he is making America great again for financiopaths, because it's announced today that they have stripped enforcement powers from the CFPB office, called the Office of Fair Lending and Equal Opportunity, that had penalized lenders that had systematically imposed interest rates on minorities that are higher than those applied to white customers. And this is a very significant rollback, but it is being presented or spun as an efficiency move. So, first, a critic. Lisa Donner, Executive Director, Americans for Financial Reform. These changes threaten effective enforcement of civil rights laws and increase the likelihood that people will continue to face discriminatory access and pricing as they navigate their economic lives. That's a nice way of saying people of color will be ripped off. But the Orwellian spin from Mulvaney's spokesman: by elevating the Office of Fair Lending to the Director's Office, we have enhanced its ability to focus on other important responsibilities. By combining these efforts under one roof, we gain efficiency and consistency without sacrificing effectiveness. But here's one thing that won't happen in the future. A couple of years ago, the CFPB forced Ally Financial, one of the nation's largest auto lenders, to pay almost $100 million to settle charges. It had systematically allowed minorities to be charged more for car loans than whites. Yeah, we're going to make sure that doesn't happen again. Over at Tom Dispatch, Wall Street whistleblower and a veteran from the financial industry, Nomi Prinz, has published a great piece called Trump's Financial Arsonists. And she predicts that by neutering the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, putting members of the wrecking crew and graduates of Goldman Sachs in charge of various regulatory agencies, that Trump is setting the scene for a future financial meltdown like the one we had in 2008. She says, watch out. Even in the seemingly best of times, neglecting Wall Street is a dangerous idea. With a ragtag Trumpian crew of ex-bankers and Goldman Sachs alumni as the only watchdogs in town, it's time to focus, because one thing is clear: Trump's economic team is in the process of making the financial system combustible again. And Nomi Prinz names names, and she identifies the key players. For example, Steve Mnuchin, who is the former Goldman Sachs partner, now Treasury Secretary. He plugged in his pal, Joseph Otting, running the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. He used to work at IndyMac, the failed California bank that Mnuchin picked up and then foreclosed on many homeowners here in California and the West. So I recommend this. It's a good read, and some of these names will likely pop up in the future. The U.S. has failed again after spending something like $150 billion going back to the Reagan era on Star Wars missile defense. Yesterday, we launched an interceptor from the Hawaiian island of Kauai. Hello, Kauai. Aloha. And the SM-3 Block 2A missile, developed by the Raytheon Company with great taxpayer support, was launched from a test site, and it missed its target. And when you hear Trump threaten North Korea that we can stop any missiles that they launch, just remember that it's bullshit. And that's why we haven't attempted to intercept any of the test missiles that have been launched. And one of the things that North Korea can do is jam our radars. I have a well-placed source who is a vendor to the Pentagon, who explained to me that one of the biggest issues in trying to get missile defense to work in the field, in the real world, is that they can use jamming devices to distract our missile that's supposed to take out their missile. Interesting stuff in the New York Times today. I want to note a couple of pieces. One is headlined, "As Strongmen Steamroll Their Opponents, U.S. is Silent." And what Declan Walsh notes, with a byline from Cairo, Egypt, is that the dictator, the military dictator of Egypt, General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, is up for re-election in March. And this election will just be as corrupt as the last one that Obama embraced when he allowed the destruction of Mohamed Morsi, the freely elected leader of Egypt following the Arab Spring and the ejection of the Mubarak dictatorship. Obama quietly enabled al-Sisi to, retake power as a dictator. And the article goes on to talk about Cambodia. Prime Minister Hun Sen, who's been the strongman for 33 years, has led a sweeping crackdown on opponents before elections this summer. In Honduras, President Juan Orlando Hernandez, whose first term was enabled by a coup that was promoted by Obama and Hillary Clinton. Well, they failed to mention that in the Times article, but Hernandez was inaugurated for a second term on Saturday amid uproar from opposition figures about a rigged election. And then they mentioned Putin, of course, who is up for re-election in March, and he has just recently once again locked up Navalny, who is his most potent opponent. And they ding Trump correctly that he has really taken a pass on human rights or even discussion of it with his fellow dictators. Well, he's a would-be dictator. And that hypocritically, Trump has not hesitated to use human rights against Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, because, well, it's convenient. And here's another piece from the Times. I commend them because they sent a reporter to the Syrian-Turkish border. I'm not aware of any other American media representatives, particularly the television people, who are covering this current conflict, where Turkey is taking on the Kurdish fighters who the U.S. has been supporting for years, first covertly and now overtly, as the most effective force against the Islamic State and the Assad government. And along the Turkish border, Turkish forces have been attacking the Kurds around a town called Afrin and the nearby city of Manbij. And Manbij is where the reporter Rod Nordland reports from. And the biggest takeaway I have is that the Kurdish fighters have a very unrealistic sense of the loyalty of the United States, whether it was Obama or now Trump. One of the commanders said, "The Americans come here a lot. We know we can count on them because they've promised us." And later in the article, they quote a leader of the Manbij government who said, let me find this for you here. Here it is. "We trust our friends in the coalition. Of course they're going to protect us. Now our allies are committing to work with us, and Erdogan can't cross that line." He said American coalition officials had assured Manbij authorities that they would not abandon them. And I predict that we will abandon them. We will not confront Turkey and risk a rift in NATO, and we will not put more American boots on the ground to enforce our interest in supporting the Kurds, if that's true. So to our friends in the region, please relay that American promises cannot be relied upon. A number of people who served under President Bush in positions related to the establishment of the camp at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, were approached by The Guardian. I haven't seen a similar report in major American newspapers, but these individuals, led by Colonel Morris Davis, who's been a guest on this program, he was a chief prosecutor of the military commissions, and he resigned back in about 2007, in protest over the kangaroo court system there. He said, "With respect to the military commissions, we have screwed them up so bad for so long that they are beyond redemption. And Davis went on to say, we've invested about $6.5 billion on detention at Guantanamo. And what has it gotten us? We wasted our money. These guys could have been housed in federal prison for a fraction of the cost. We have over 1,000 troops dedicated to the detention operations that could be used elsewhere. We have squandered our credibility around the world on these trials. Also quoted in the article, John Bellinger, who is a legal advisor in the Bush White House, Alberto Mora, the general counsel of the Department of the Navy, and Mark Fallon, a former chief investigator at the Defense Department's Criminal Investigation Task Force. Interesting that American media isn't too keen on objecting to Trump's decision to keep Guantanamo open and his threat to send more prisoners there. At the United Nations, the UN Human Rights Office issued a preliminary report saying that they have identified 206 companies, mostly Israeli and American, that operate in the illegal occupied territories of the West Bank. Now, Israel calls this a blacklist, but it is a list. They haven't named the companies, but they said that 143 are based in Israel, 22 in the United States, and that they are violating human rights associated with the settlements by exploiting labor in this area. So I predict that Nikki Haley will lower the boom, and we will never see the names of the companies on that list, whether it's a white list or a black list. And in Poland, maybe you heard about this, the Polish government, which is a hardline right-wing, and they've undermined the independence of the judiciary there, they're on a troubling path. And I don't support the legislation that is before President Andrzej Duda. It would require penalties for people who use phrases like Polish death camps to refer to concentration camps set up in Poland by the Nazis. Now, this is an effort to manage history, to scrub the facts. And, Poland did not submit. They didn't have a proxy government, like there was in France and in Italy. So I do understand the contentiousness of this issue. But to try to ban speech is a serious mistake. And what's fascinating here is that Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to interfere in the politics of the nation of Poland. The law is baseless. I strongly oppose it. One cannot change history, and the Holocaust cannot be denied. Now, I actually, in general, agree with Netanyahu on this. But it doesn't stop him from a concerted, orchestrated campaign aided and abetted by AIPAC and members of both political parties to squelch free speech in the United States when it is critical of the state of Israel. There's much more news than I have time for today, and I just want to tip you to what I think is a pretty interesting roundtable discussion about the future of politics in Brazil that has been posted at Jacobin magazine. I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast, and when you have a chance, take a look. I have not read it all, but what I did peruse appears pretty interesting, and it's not available in the American media. Finally today, a tip of the hat to Ian Berman, who had to work through Facebook's new filters to get some information to me. But I'm linking to a video clip from the Real News Network that explains that oil spill in the East China Sea that was caused by a ship crash, a collision between a Chinese cargo ship and an Iranian a Panamanian tanker with Iranian oil on it. This occurred way back on January 6th, and the collision, the oil tanker burned for more than a week, and then it sank. And it's believed that this is the second biggest marine oil spill, surpassed only by the BP Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's turning into a major international calamity, and I invite you to check out the video and learn more about this when you have an opportunity. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. We tipped you that it's available every day on YouTube, and I hope you'll become a YouTube subscriber to help me out. I remain your humble host, Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.